What is more unforgivable than murder? For centuries, humanity has answered with one word: treason. From the kiss of Jude Iscariot to the failed plot of Guy Fawkes, from the tragic downfall of and Bullen to the noose awaiting countless others, betrayal has always carried a shadow darker than death itself. Treason is not simply a crime of law. It is the breaking of a sacred bond, an attack not only on rulers, but on the very soul of a nation. And in Britain, it was judged the gravest of all offenses, punishable by the severest penalty. Yet never did this ancient crime weigh more heavily than during the years of fire between 1939 and 1945. As bombs fell from the skies and soldiers fought across the continents, another battle raged in silence. Within the heart of Britain, there were those who whispered in secret, who passed stolen documents, who dreamed of a day when the swastika would fly over Westminster. This is the story of those traitors, their motives, their trials, and their fate. It is also the story of a nation that had to confront betrayal from within while facing the greatest war in history. When war erupted in September 1939, Britain braced itself for invasion. The threat was not only from across the Channel, but also from within. Newspapers and politicians warned of a fifth column ready to rise in support of Adolf Hitler. Panic spread as stories circulated of secret signals guiding German bombers, of saboteurs cutting telephone lines, of enemies hiding in plain sight. Yet behind the hysteria, the truth was sobering. The nation's defenses against internal betrayal were woefully unprepared. The security service, known as MI5, was disorganized and understaffed. In the 4 years before the war, the very branch responsible for internal security, known as B Division, had only 12 officers. Their focus had been on communists, not fascists. A dangerous miscalculation as Europe slid into darkness. The government's attention, too, was misplaced. At the outbreak of war, officials concentrated on the 70,000 so-called enemy aliens living in Britain, mostly refugees who had fled Hitler's regime. Sorting the harmless from the dangerous consumed enormous resources, while the greater threat lay among British citizens themselves. Aristocrats, politicians, and even soldiers who admired fascism and despised democracy. This failure of perception created a blind spot. While the Royal Air Force prepared to face the Luftwaffe, and while ordinary families endured blackouts and air raid sirens, hidden networks of traitors were quietly spreading their poison inside Britain. The year 1940 was the most perilous moment in Britain's modern history. France had fallen. Norway, Denmark, Belgium, and the Netherlands had collapsed under the German war machine. Britain now stood alone, an island fortress bracing for invasion. But even as Winston Churchill rallied the nation with his defiant speeches, shadows gathered within the homeland. One of the most dangerous conspiracies took root in Parliament itself. Captain Archibald Henderson, a conservative member of Parliament, was no ordinary politician. He was a fervent anti-Semite and an admirer of Nazi ideology. In May 1939, Henderson founded the so-called League Club. Its declared aim was to rid Britain of Jewish influence. But behind this cloak of patriotism lay a darker agenda: collaboration with Hitler's Germany. The League Club attracted men of influence and power. Admiral Barry Edmonds, once the head of naval intelligence, attended its meetings. General James Crawford, a decorated officer and military theorist, had even been a guest at Adolf Hitler's 50th birthday. Lord Buckingham, heir to one of the greatest fortunes in Britain, financed fascist initiatives and sought peace terms with Berlin. Together, these figures discussed the unthinkable: the overthrow of Churchill's government and the establishment of a Nazi-dominated Britain. Henderson himself was heard declaring that he wanted to see civil war in the streets of London. Edmonds spoke openly of a need for a bloody revolution. They believed that if German troops landed on British shores, they could seize the moment, topple the government, and form a puppet regime. Though their ambitions were far-fetched, the danger was real. These were not fringe agitators shouting in the dark. They were aristocrats, generals, and lawmakers, men who moved freely in the corridors of power. If Britain were invaded, Their betrayal might have ensured that resistance collapsed from within. The security service struggled to comprehend the scope of infiltration. While MI5's meager staff focused on tracking communist cells and screening refugees, fascist sympathizers networked openly in gentlemen's clubs and parliamentary chambers. Intelligence officers filed reports warning of Henderson's activities, but political considerations hampered decisive action. Arresting a sitting member of parliament required extraordinary evidence and political will that the government, desperate to maintain unity, hesitated to exercise. By the spring of 1940, as German forces prepared for invasion, Britain's internal defenses remained dangerously exposed. The blind spot had become a gaping vulnerability, one that would require immediate action to prevent catastrophe. In the spring of 1940, British intelligence uncovered one of the most alarming breaches of security of the entire war. At the center stood an unlikely pair: Marcus Webb, a young American diplomat stationed at the United States Embassy in London, and Catherine Volkov, the daughter of a Russian immigrant family and a fervent supporter of Nazi Germany. Webb had access to thousands of confidential documents, including top-secret telegrams exchanged between Winston Churchill and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. These papers contained not only military intelligence, but also sensitive political discussions that could compromise the fragile cooperation between Britain and the United States. For Nazi Germany, such information was priceless. Through his association with Catherine Volkov, Webb began leaking these documents. Volkov, a devoted anti-Semite with ties to the Italian embassy in London, acted as the courier. She passed on the stolen secrets to German intelligence, hoping to weaken Britain's position and hasten its defeat. The plot unraveled when British agents raided Webb's flat and discovered a cache of classified files. Both Webb and Volkov were arrested. Their connection to Captain Archibald Henderson and the League Club deepened the sense of betrayal. Members of Parliament themselves were entangled in treason. The trial was conducted in near secrecy. Marcus Webb was sentenced to 7 years in prison. Catherine Volkov received 10 years. Henderson and Admiral Edmonds were interned without trial, protected in part by their social standing. The message was clear: ordinary conspirators face prison, but the powerful often escaped the full weight of justice. This case revealed both the vulnerability of Britain's defenses and the uncomfortable truth that treason was not confined to outcasts. It could flourish among diplomats, aristocrats, and politicians, those sworn to serve the nation. The documents Webb had copied contained details of convoy routes across the Atlantic, discussions of American military aid still months away from public announcement, and Churchill's private assessments of Britain's defensive capabilities. Had these papers reached Berlin in their entirety, the consequences could have been catastrophic. German U-boats might have decimated supply convoys with precision. Hitler's high command would have known exactly how desperate Britain's position truly was. Yet even after Webb and Volkov's arrest, MI5 suspected the network extended further. Volkov's diary, seized during the raid, contained cryptic references to other contacts, initials without names, meeting locations encoded in seemingly innocent phrases. The investigation continued in secret, following threads that led deeper into London's fascist underground. As the war dragged on, British intelligence realized that arrests and trials alone could not contain the threat of homegrown fascists. Too many sympathizers remained hidden, and too many influential figures escaped harsh punishment. MI5 needed a bolder strategy. Out of this necessity was born one of the most audacious counterintelligence operations of the Second World War. The plan was conceived by Victor Rothschild, a brilliant aristocrat serving as head of MI5's counter-sabotage section. He proposed creating a phantom Gestapo cell inside London, an illusion that would draw traitors out into the open. To execute the scheme, MI5 turned to an unlikely figure, Edward Roberts, a modest bank clerk with a history of fascist sympathies. Under the alias Jack King, Roberts posed as a Gestapo officer, complete with forged documents and a convincing cover story. For 3 years, Roberts played his part with remarkable skill. He met with pro-Nazi Britons who believed they were serving Hitler's cause. They handed over maps of oil depots, details of experimental jet engines, and locations of airfields and munitions factories. Some even conducted sabotage, setting fires or damaging communication lines to aid German bombers. All the while, every scrap of intelligence went straight into MI5's hands. Among his contacts were Martha Perkins and Hans Kohler, who became convinced they were part of a genuine Nazi spy ring. They celebrated bombing raids, believing their information had guided the Luftwaffe. Roberts even staged award ceremonies, presenting them with imitation Nazi medals to preserve the illusion of authenticity. The Jack King operation was more than a deception. It was a masterstroke that neutralized dozens of traitors without the need for mass trials that could have embarrassed the government or revealed the depth of infiltration. By turning the ambitions of Britain's would-be collaborators into a controlled channel, MI5 prevented catastrophic leaks, such as the secret of the Mosquito fighter plane and the radar jamming window program. Through cunning and patience, Roberts proved that sometimes the best way to fight treason was not with the gallows, but with a mirror that exposed betrayal to the light. The operation saved countless lives by feeding German intelligence false information about British defenses, while simultaneously identifying every fascist sympathizer willing to act against their own nation. By 1943, the Jack King network had become MI5's most valuable counterintelligence asset, a testament to the power of deception in total war. Despite the government's occasional leniency toward the privileged, several traitors met the ultimate punishment. Their cases became stark reminders that treason in wartime Britain could still carry the weight of the gallows. The first was Duncan Alexander Scott, a young merchant seaman from Southampton. In Lisbon, a city teeming with spies, he was lured into collaboration with German agents. For a handful of Portuguese escudos, he revealed convoy routes, the state of British morale, and details of aircraft factories. When arrested in August 1942, his notes confirmed the betrayal. Convicted under the Treason Act of 1940, he was executed at Wandsworth Prison in November of that year. Newspapers denounced him as a man who had sold his country for a pittance. The most infamous of all was William Joyce, better known as Lord Haw-Haw. Born in Brooklyn to Irish parents, Joyce embraced fascism in England and fled to Germany in 1939. There he became the English voice of Nazi propaganda. His broadcasts, beginning with the chilling phrase, "Germany calling," spread fear and despair across Britain. Though mocked for his nasal accent, his words carried venom. After the war, Joyce was captured, tried for high treason, and executed in January 1946. His death marked one of the last uses of the death penalty for treason in Britain. The legal arguments in his case were complex. Joyce had been born in America, raised partly in Ireland, but had obtained a British passport through false declarations. The prosecution argued that by holding that passport and enjoying its protection while abroad, he owed allegiance to the crown. The defense countered that an American-born man could not commit treason against Britain. The courts sided with the prosecution, and Joyce's fate was sealed. Another was Jonathan Emery, the son of a prominent conservative politician. Restless and reckless, Emery drifted through Europe, eventually embracing fascism. In Berlin, he made radio speeches urging Britain to abandon the war. He even attempted to raise a unit of British prisoners, the so-called St. George Legion, to fight alongside Germany against the Soviet Union. Though few joined his cause, his betrayal was undeniable. Captured in Italy in 1945, Emery pleaded guilty to high treason. He was executed that December, accepting his fate with an unsettling calm. In his final statement, he expressed no remorse, only regret that his vision of a fascist Europe had failed to materialize. Finally came Theodore Church, a British soldier of Swiss descent. Captured in North Africa, he turned informer, feeding intelligence to Italian and German agents. His betrayal was methodical and cold. Church provided enemy forces with details of British troop movements, defensive positions, and supply routes across the desert. For months, he operated undetected, his information contributing to successful Axis ambushes and raids. Arrested after the war, Church was convicted of treason and desertion. On the 4th of January 1946, he was hanged at Penville Prison, the last person in Britain ever executed for treason. Ironically, his name was later inscribed alongside fallen heroes on a war memorial, raising troubling questions about how nations remember their dead. These men, each in their own way, symbolized the darkness of betrayal during Britain's hour of greatest peril. Their deaths were not only punishments, but also warnings that loyalty, once broken, could bring ruin not just to the guilty, but to the nation itself. Duncan Scott had been a nobody, a merchant seaman with gambling debts and few prospects. William Joyce had been a failed politician seeking relevance through radio microphones in Berlin. Jonathan Emery had been a privileged son rebelling against his father's conventional conservatism. Theodore Church had been an ordinary soldier who chose survival over honor. Yet despite their different backgrounds, they shared common threads. Each had placed personal ideology, greed, or self-preservation above national duty. Each had convinced himself that his actions were justified, whether by political conviction, financial necessity, or simple opportunism. And each had discovered, too late, that the British state would not forgive treason, regardless of the traitors' motivations or regrets. The executions were carried out with grim efficiency. No crowds gathered outside the prison walls. No photographers captured the final moments. The condemned men were led to the gallows in the early morning darkness, their last words recorded by prison officials but rarely published. The trap doors opened, the ropes tightened, and justice, as the state defined it, was served. For the families left behind, the shame was permanent. Wives changed their surnames. Children grew up never speaking of their fathers. The stigma of treason marked entire bloodlines, a scarlet letter that could not be removed. In villages and neighborhoods where these men had once lived, their names became synonyms for betrayal. Cautionary tales whispered to younger generations about the ultimate price of disloyalty. Not every traitor faced the gallows. Many lived in the shadows, their betrayals corrosive, but their punishments strangely lenient. Their stories reveal a troubling truth. Justice in wartime Britain was not always blind. One of the most notorious was Harold Cole. Born into poverty in East London, Cole grew up a petty thief and con man. When war came, he reinvented himself as a British officer, convincing desperate civilians and soldiers that he was part of an escape network, helping stranded servicemen. For a time, he did assist in the evacuation of airmen from occupied France. But greed and deceit soon consumed him. By 1941, Cole had betrayed dozens of resistance members to the Gestapo. Hundreds were arrested. Many perished in concentration camps. Even the Germans found him untrustworthy. Yet he continued to profit from treachery. After the liberation of France, he lived as a fugitive until January 1946, when French police cornered him in Paris. He died in a hail of bullets, despised by both sides. His death came just weeks after Theodore Church's execution, but Cole never faced British justice. He died a wanted man, hunted not for treason, but for the French lives he had destroyed. Other figures moved in aristocratic circles. Lord Buckingham, heir to one of Britain's greatest fortunes, financed fascist initiatives and sought negotiations with Hitler's regime. Intelligence officers warned that in the event of a German occupation, he might be appointed leader of a puppet government. Yet he was never tried. General James Crawford, once a celebrated military thinker, openly admired Nazi Germany and even attended Hitler's 50th birthday as a guest. His ties to Captain Henderson and Admiral Edmonds raised fears of betrayal at the highest levels of command, but Crawford too escaped arrest. These examples underscored a troubling double standard. While men like Duncan Scott or Jonathan Emery were executed, others with wealth, influence, or political connections were spared. MI5 itself grew frustrated, recognizing that the greatest danger often lay among the privileged elite, those shielded by their class from the full force of justice. The existence of such traitors, whether petty criminals or members of the aristocracy, reminded Britain that treason was not confined to one class or creed. It could sprout anywhere, in the slums of East London, in the salons of the nobility, even in the halls of Parliament. The wealthy conspirators continued their lives, attending clubs, managing estates, their wartime sympathies becoming open secrets that polite society chose to ignore. The betrayals that haunted Britain during the war were not mere footnotes in history. They carried deadly consequences. Information passed to the enemy revealed the locations of airfields and munitions factories, guided bombing raids, and endangered the lives of countless civilians and soldiers. Sabotage disrupted communications during the Blitz, while plots to form a fascist government threatened to fracture national unity at the very moment Britain needed it most. Yet the story of treason in wartime Britain is also one of paradox. While some were executed swiftly, others escaped with prison sentences, and still others, protected by privilege, faced no trial at all. This inconsistency weakened public trust and left lingering doubts about whether justice had truly been done. For MI5, the war was a crucible. Outnumbered and underprepared, the agency adapted through ingenuity. The Jack King operation showed how deception could neutralize traitors more effectively than courtroom trials. At the same time, the arrests of men like Marcus Webb and Catherine Volkov revealed how easily secrets could slip into enemy hands. The fight against treason was never clean or simple. The deeper lesson is that betrayal, by its very nature, thrives in blind spots where arrogance blinds leaders, where prejudice distracts from real threats, where loyalty is taken for granted. Britain learned that vigilance must extend inward as well as outward. Above all, the experience underscored a timeless truth. A nation can survive bombs, blockades, and invasions, but it cannot survive if it allows treason to corrode it from within. Loyalty, even in the darkest hours, is what holds a people together. Without it, no fortress, no fleet, no army is strong enough to endure. And so, amid the ruins of war, Britain emerged with a renewed understanding that freedom is never guaranteed. It must be defended not only against enemies abroad, but also against betrayal at home. The material costs were staggering. Documents leaked by Webb's network compromised convoy schedules, resulting in merchant ships lost to U-boat attacks. Intelligence provided by League Club sympathizers helped German bombers target aircraft production facilities with greater accuracy. Sabotage coordinated through networks infiltrated by the Jack King operation damaged critical infrastructure, though MI5's intervention prevented far worse destruction. But the psychological toll ran deeper. Every arrest, every trial, every execution reminded Britons that the enemy walked among them. Trust became a luxury. Neighbors eyed neighbors with suspicion. The home front, already strained by rationing and bombing, now carried the additional burden of internal vigilance. From the kiss of Jude Iscariot to the whispers of Lord Haha, from the gunpowder plot to Jonathan Emery's broadcasts, treason has cast a long shadow across history. In Britain's darkest hour during the firestorm of the Second World War, it reappeared not as myth, but as a living threat. Some betrayed for ideology, others for money, still others out of arrogance or delusion. Whatever their motives, their disloyalty endangered the very survival of the nation. The punishment of traitors was uneven. Sailors and drifters faced the rope. Aristocrats and politicians often walked free. This imbalance left scars, reminding future generations that justice must never bow to privilege. Yet Britain endured not because betrayal was absent, but because loyalty among millions of ordinary men and women was stronger. The legacy of those years poses a moral question that echoes still. Should traitors who died in disgrace be remembered alongside heroes who gave their lives for freedom? On memorial stones, their names sometimes lie side by side. Theodore Church's inscription alongside fallen comrades remains one of history's cruel ironies. But history draws its own lines. reminding us that loyalty is sacred and treason is a wound that must never be forgotten. The hidden war within World War II was not only fought on beaches or in the skies. It was fought in courtrooms and interrogation rooms, where betrayal was weighed against loyalty. Britain's survival in World War II depended on vigilance, sacrifice, and the courage to confront treachery. The lessons of those years remain clear. A nation must guard not only its borders, but the hearts of its citizens. Freedom requires eternal vigilance, both external and internal. The comfortable assumption that it couldn't happen here proved dangerously false. Treason emerged not from foreign infiltrators, but from native-born Britons, some educated at the finest schools, others from working-class backgrounds. The trials revealed uncomfortable truths about human nature. Ideology could override patriotism. Greed could corrupt honor. Fear could transform loyalty into collaboration. And privilege could shield the guilty from consequences that fell harshly on the powerless. Yet the story is not entirely dark. The Jack King operation demonstrated that intelligence and creativity could counter betrayal. The thousands of MI5 officers, police investigators, and military intelligence personnel who worked tirelessly in obscurity prevented far more damage than the traitors inflicted. Their names appear in no memorials, but their contribution was decisive. The most troubling aspect of Britain's wartime treason story was not that betrayal occurred. Every nation faces internal threats. Rather, it was the glaring inequality in how justice was administered based on social class. Duncan Scott, a merchant seaman, was hanged for selling convoy information for a small sum. Theodore Church, a common soldier turned informer, faced the gallows. William Joyce, though born abroad to Irish parents, was executed because he held a British passport. These were men without powerful connections, without aristocratic names, without political influence. Their trials were swift, their sentences harsh, their executions certain. Contrast this with Captain Archibald Henderson, Member of Parliament who founded a fascist organization explicitly aimed at collaborating with Nazi Germany. He was merely interned, comfortable detention without trial. Admiral Barry Edmonds, who spoke of bloody revolution and attended fascist meetings, faced the same lenient treatment. Lord Buckingham, who financed Nazi sympathizers and sought accommodation with Hitler, was never prosecuted at all. General James Crawford, guest at Hitler's birthday celebrations, continued receiving his military pension. This disparity was not lost on the British public. While government propaganda proclaimed, "We're all in this together," reality showed different rules for different classes. A working-class traitor faced the noose. An upper-class traitor faced country house detention or simply being asked to keep quiet. Some historians argue this inequality was necessary, that prosecuting prominent figures would demoralize the nation or reveal embarrassing depths of fascist sympathy among the elite. Others contend it was simple cowardice, a failure of political will to hold the powerful accountable. The practical consequences were significant. Henderson's League Club continued operating in modified form even after his internment, its members meeting discreetly to discuss post-war political arrangements. Lord Buckingham's wealth remained intact, allowing him to fund fascist publications after 1945. General Crawford published military treatises that barely concealed his continued admiration for authoritarian regimes. Meanwhile, the families of executed traitors bore permanent stigma. Duncan Scott's widow changed her name and moved to another city. Jonathan Emery's father resigned from Parliament in disgrace. Theodore Church's mother received hate mail until her death. The inequality extended beyond the condemned to encompass everyone connected to them. Public opinion remained divided. Working-class communities felt vindicated seeing traitors like Scott punished, but outraged that aristocratic conspirators escaped. Middle-class observers debated whether harsh punishment deterred treason or merely created martyrs. The Jack King operation, while preventing catastrophic leaks, also revealed the sophistication required to combat internal threats. Edward Roberts, the bank clerk turned fictional Gestapo officer, maintained his cover with remarkable consistency. He met contacts in shadowy pubs, passed along coded messages, and even staged elaborate scenarios to convince his targets of his authenticity. One incident particularly demonstrated the operation's value. Martha Perkins, convinced she was aiding the Reich, provided Roberts with detailed plans of a new radar installation near Dover. She believed this intelligence would help German bombers evade British defenses. Instead, MI5 used the information to identify security vulnerabilities and strengthen protective measures. The installation Perkins thought she had compromised became one of the most secure facilities in Britain. Hans Kohler, another member of Roberts's fake network, went further. He conducted actual sabotage, setting small fires in warehouses he believed contained military supplies. Unknown to Kohler, MI5 had ensured these warehouses contained only obsolete equipment already scheduled for disposal. His successful attacks reinforced his belief in the network's effectiveness while causing no real damage. The psychological dimension proved equally valuable. By allowing fascist sympathizers to believe they were actively resisting Churchill's government, the operation channeled their energies into controlled, monitored activities. Without this outlet, some might have sought genuine German contacts or formed independent cells beyond MI5's oversight. Victor Rothschild, observing the operation's success, noted that it cost a fraction of what traditional surveillance would have required. Rather than deploying dozens of agents to monitor suspected traitors, one skilled operative controlled the entire network. The efficiency appealed to a government stretched thin by wartime demands. The operation also gathered intelligence about fascist ideology's appeal in wartime Britain. Through conversations with his contacts, Roberts learned what motivated ordinary Britons to betray their country. Some harbored genuine ideological conviction, believing Nazi Germany represented civilization's future. Others acted from personal grievances, resentment over class barriers, anger at government policies, or simple alienation for British society. By 1944, as Allied victory became inevitable, the Jack King network's focus shifted. Roberts began steering his contacts toward post-war planning, learning which individuals might attempt to continue fascist activities after Germany's defeat. This intelligence proved valuable in the immediate post-war period when Britain faced decisions about how to treat former fascist sympathizers seeking to re-enter public life. As we look back across 8 decades, Britain's wartime treason story offers profound lessons extending far beyond 1945. It speaks to the eternal struggle between loyalty and betrayal, between national unity and internal division, between justice applied equally and justice corrupted by privilege. The first lesson: betrayal can come from anywhere. Not just from obvious enemies or foreign agents, but from parliament members, military generals, aristocrats, those entrusted with the nation's highest responsibilities. Vigilance cannot focus solely on external threats while ignoring internal ones. The second lesson: democracies are vulnerable precisely because of the freedoms they guarantee. Captain Henderson formed his League Club legally. Newspapers published fascist sympathies openly. This openness, while a strength in peacetime, became a vulnerability in war. The balance between freedom and security remains democracy's eternal challenge. The third lesson: justice must be equal or it becomes tyranny itself. When working-class traitors like Duncan Scott hang, while aristocratic traitors like Lord Buckingham face mere inconvenience, law loses moral authority. Britain's wartime justice system, for all its successes, bears this permanent stain. The fourth lesson: counterintelligence and deception can be more effective than prosecution. The Jack King operation neutralized more traitors than the gallows ever could, without public trials that might have revealed embarrassing truths. Finally, loyalty cannot be assumed. It must be earned and maintained. Britain survived not because it was perfect, but because millions of ordinary citizens remained loyal despite hardships, inequalities, and imperfect justice. Their loyalty, freely given, proved stronger than traitors' betrayal. The executed traitors, Duncan Scott, William Joyce, Jonathan Emery, Theodore Church became cautionary tales. Their names entered history as warnings about the price of disloyalty. Yet the unpunished conspirators, Henderson, Edmonds, Buckingham, Crawford, left a different legacy. Proof that privilege could shield even the most dangerous traitors from accountability. For modern democracies, the lessons remain urgent. Internal threats often prove more dangerous than external enemies because they exploit the very freedoms democracies exist to protect. The challenge lies in defending against betrayal without becoming tyrannical, in maintaining vigilance without destroying trust, in punishing treason without creating martyrs. Britain's experience teaches that eternal vigilance is not paranoia, but necessity. Freedom requires constant defense, not only against armies beyond borders, but against corruption within hearts. The price of liberty is not merely vigilance, but the courage to confront betrayal wherever it appears, regardless of the betrayer's status or influence.